Hi, I'm Luann Worley with Rock and Book Reviews, and I'm so pleased today to have Tim J. Myers with us today. Um, Tim, you are a little bit of a mystery on the internet. uh, have you always lived in California?
I have. I haven't, actually, I should say. Maybe that's why I'm a mystery on the internet, because I say things that are not factual. I just have to say quickly that I might be a mystery on the internet because there are other Tim Myers out there. So there's a mystery writer named Tim Myers who lives in North Carolina. Yeah, sometimes.
Any relative?
No, none at all, but we're often mistaken for each other, and our books are attributed to each other and that kind of thing. I'm actually from Colorado Springs. I grew up in Colorado Springs, and I've been here since 2001. So I'm one of those many transplanted Californians. But I love Colorado too. My home state is an incredibly beautiful place.
What's your favorite parts of each state that you've lived in?
Well, gosh. Both of them have so many. Do you live in Utah?
Yes.
Yeah, Utah is another one of those states. There is so much in Utah that is so unbelievably awesome and beautiful. How would you pick, right? So Colorado Springs, of course, to me, because Colorado, because I grew up in the Springs, I love Pikes Peak, and I especially love the Garden of the Gods, which is a beautiful, it's kind of a park, but it's a geological feature, these huge red sandstone. It's kind of hard to describe them. It's geological formations that were tilted by the Rockies arising. So they're like these beautiful red slabs, huge towering slabs, right there at the foot of Pikes Peak. And
I'm not seeing it.
It's worth it. It's incredibly beautiful. And in California, I love the Bay Area. I just love everything about the Bay Area. I can't get enough of it. So I consider both of those places my home.
Well, that's the best of both worlds, right?
Yes.
The ocean on one side and the mountains on the other.
Yes. We always laugh in my family at an old Faulty Towers episode when the Californians are visiting this English hotel, and the English host is all sniffy about California. And the California guy says, well, you can ski in the afternoon and ski in the morning and swim in the afternoon. And the Englishman says, sounds rather tiring.
And you have swimming weather most of the year round, don't you?
Well, we do, but the water is just too darn cold. It's like 52 degrees. Yeah. I mean, I can barely put my feet in it, and I love to swim in the ocean. So I can't. Yeah. Even in LA, I mean, I've discovered, from being down there on vacation occasionally, it's cold, pretty cold in the winter. Those surfers wear wetsuits. In the summer, it's great, but yeah.
Okay. How many siblings do you have? And tell us a little bit about your youth and special hobbies you had and so forth.
So I am actually the oldest of 11 children, which is probably,
wow.
Yeah, that's one thing about me that gets more reaction from people than anything else. I mean, it was kind of traditional when I was a kid. There were a lot of big Catholic families like that. So being the oldest is, that's a whole thing. And it was my family is completely human. We have our flaws and our good points. But one thing about my family is, boy, they are very much alive. My siblings tend to be very energetic, outspoken and everything. So it was fun. It was wild at times, but it was incredibly fun to grow up in that family. And I also, I was mature in some ways and not mature in others, but I started taking a kind of a fatherly interest in my younger siblings. My parents were incredibly busy. My dad was a OBGYN, he was baby doctor, gone all the time. His record was 5 babies in one night. And my mom, of course, had 11 kids. So I wish I'd helped her more when I was younger, but we would take the kids, especially when my now wife and then girlfriend and I were going out, we would take the kids and go places with them. So we started acting a bit like parents to them. And that, of course, fed into my own parenting. And so that was a big thing. That was a big thing for me, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Yeah.
I think that must be part of a large family. I know my family, you either love them or hate them, because when they get together, they're crazy.
Yeah, well, no, you sound like you have a family very much like mine. I'll often, when I'm talking to my own kids, they're adults now, but when they were teenagers, of course, they naturally think their parents are totally out of it. And when they would, start expressing that, I'd say, look, when it comes to your parents, you got two choices: boring or weird. That's it. So you got weird. You should be happy. And so you and I are not from boring families. We're from lively.
I'm talking about my kids.
Oh, your own kids. Yeah. Yeah, well,
I only had two siblings.
Yeah, no. My kids are the same way too. They are not boring. Not boring at all.
But I hope I fall into the weird category and not the boring. So.
Anybody who's running the rocking book reviews falls into the weird category. You should be proud.
Okay. Share with us a couple of occasions in your younger life that has had an impact on you that you feel has helped make you into the man you are today.
It's funny because a lot of my book, Glad to Be Dad, A Call to Fatherhood, is about some shifts in parenting, particularly for men, because a lot of things have changed in American culture. And I'm a huge proponent of men being really committed to life at home. I think it's better for wives, it's better for kids, and I think it's better for men. I think men are much happier. Although it comes, it's not easy. Having a family, as you know, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of commitment. An adult has to be very mature and unselfish to be a good parent. But I started saying that things have changed, but some things have stayed the same and always will be. And, chief among them is family love. So my parents were both Midwesterners, small town Nebraska, small town Iowa. And not all Midwesterners are like this, but they tend to kind of keep it close to the vest in terms of showing emotions. So they weren't demonstrative of their love as I was growing up. Now, of course, I look back and go, oh my God, they were working their fingers to the bone for us, and they loved us. There was no question. But what happened one night when I was in high school, painter's pants, painter's overalls, the white painter's overalls were the rage for, I don't know, 15 days or whatever. But anyway, I had a pair of them when I'd gone out to a dance or something. And my uncle also, who's a priest and a writer, kind of lived with my family, lived in the same town, was always at our house, that kind of thing, my dad's brother. So I came home, probably midnight or whatever, and my mom, my uncle, and my dad were just kind of flipped out, and they were like, oh, Tim, we were so afraid. Some guy wearing white painter's overalls apparently had passed out from drinking right in front of our house, and my uncle had driven up. It was in the dark, 9 at night, 10 at night, and thought it was me, and I'd been hit by a car and killed or was hurt. And when they found out it wasn't me, they were so happy, and they were expressing this to me. And here I am, a senior in high school, and I'm like, oh my God, they really love me. It was just an open expression that would not have happened were it not for that accident. So there's a traditional reality of family and parenting that I started to see in that moment and feel, and I realized I'd always wanted that love. I hadn't really thought about it. You just kind of accept your parents for what they are. But that also led me very much to my wife and I, when we fell in love and got married, we talked constantly about what it was to be parents, what a family should be and how to do it, and read every book we could read about it and the rest of it. And one of the things I learned from that is this basic principle. People not only need to be loved, they need to feel your love for them. Children particularly, they need to have that love expressed for them. Not all parents are the same. They don't have to be the same. Some people are more emotional and demonstrative than others. That's fine. You don't have to, there's no one kind of parent that makes you a perfect parent and everybody else is bad. But children really, really thrive when they feel love and when that love is expressed. And it was funny to me that a pair of overalls played such a big role in that part of my life.
That is unique.
Yes.
Okay. You are a senior lecturer at Santa Clara University. What's the difference between a lecturer and a professor?
Oh, that's a good question. So officially in the world of the university, a professor is only somebody who's tenured. So I'm a non-tenured track instructor. Professors, the thing is, most people use it very loosely. My students call me professor all the time. I try to get them to stop and they just don't. So lecturers are on one track, not tenured, and then professors, and then it's assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. It's a very medieval world with all these ranks in the university. But that's the difference. And of course, the great thing about being a senior lecturer is then you get to make fun of all the junior lecturers. I don't mean that at all. We don't even have the term junior lecturer. It reminds me of being a senior in high school. Like, what do we have, senior lecturer skip day? I mean, it's just...
Because, yeah, I never had heard that term before.
Yeah, and I don't know why. It's funny because it's not used widely, even though they're very common terms in the way university rank is.
Because we called them professors, and they weren't tenured yet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then there's tenure track, which means they're on the way to being tenured, and I'm not tenure track even. So because you can call them professors because they're.
So does that mean you plan on moving on, or?
I can't move on from where I am. I've hit as high as a lecturer can go in my university. Well, I think it's possible for a few people have made the jump to tenured, but it's very unusual.
It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
You write poetry?
I do.
What type of poetry do you write?
One of my problems in life, Luann, is that I'm a generalist in a specialist world. I write a lot of different types of poetry. So I write everything from haiku to formal poetry to free verse to, I just, I kind of like it all. And again, I'd probably do better in life if I'd pick one thing and stick with it, but I can't live that way. I just can't. I mean, to me, it's like looking at my brothers and sisters and saying, which one do you love most? I love them all. That's all there is to it.
That's why my brain doesn't, like when I started my blog, they said, pick one genre. And I thought, it's impossible.
I'm with you. I could not do that. And some people are great at that. And maybe it even helps professionally, but I know I can't live that way. So I don't even think about it anymore. It's like, whatever. I'll pay the price.
I'm with you on that. In fact, some of the best doctors in the olden days were general doctors because they knew a little bit of everything. Now, if you go to a specialist and ask about something else, another part of your body, they don't have a clue what to.
It's like, your elbow? What's that? I don't even know what that is. Yeah, my dad actually started as a GP. And I have a lot of respect for somebody in that situation. And again, I'm not against specialists. A lot of the people who are my colleagues are super specialists. I just know that I don't have the kind of brain. And again, you and I are alike in that. I could never read only one kind of book. It was just like I love hamburgers way too much, but I couldn't eat hamburgers 3 meals a day. I mean, I just could, it just doesn't make sense.
I just love learning, and if you're limited to an area, you can't really learn.
That's right. I feel the same way. And the old joke is that the specialist is someone who knows more and more about less and less. So, which is unfair to them, but it makes me laugh a little.
I think that's a good saying. Yeah. A lot of times it's true.
Yeah. Okay,
you've had over 100 of your poems published, haven't you?
Yeah, in fact, I'm happy to say 140 poems, and I have my fourth book of adult poetry is coming out, so I'm doing edits for that right now. Yeah, it's I was in 6th grade. I was kind of a little screw around when I was a kid in early elementary. It's kind of funny because I ended up being a writer and a teacher and all that. But in fact, when I was in 2nd grade, I got an F on my report card, and the category I got the F in is understanding what's read. Now, ironically, I'm married to a PhD reading specialist, so that's kind of weird. But when my sons were in 7th and 5th grade, we were driving somewhere once, and I came to a stop sign, and I stopped, of course, and my son Seth said, "Dad, why'd you stop?" And I said, "Seth, it's a stop sign." He said, "Dad, you have trouble understanding what's read, right?" He thought that was hilarious.
I'm curious, is that how you met your wife is?
Actually, that would be really funny if that was the case. It's not, but that would be, I can't read. Will you help me? Yeah, let's get married. But I was emphasizing that I just was not a school type kid. And in 6th grade, my teacher was a Catholic nun, Sister Boniface, who never smiled. And she told us one day to write an essay for homework. For some reason, and Luann, I still don't know why, I wrote a poem. This was just so unlike me. And my poem was about the martyrdom of St. Stephen, the guy got shot full of arrows. Why a normal 12-year-old boy would write about this, I have no idea, but I did. And the next day she said, all right, class, everyone can go out to recess, but Tim, I need to talk to you. And that, of course, is like, dum, da, dum, dum. You know, what did I do? I didn't follow directions. So I'm standing there just quivering, you know, thinking I'm going to get in trouble. And she goes, you know that poem you wrote? And I'm like, yes. She goes, I liked it. And again, Luann, I was astonished. And she was so encouraging to me. She encouraged me to write more poems. She gathered them into a little booklet, which just secretly thrilled me. I've been writing ever since. And I know, looking back, I was too young and immature to thank her. And that woman, whom I had, you know, stereotyped as a mean teacher, that woman went out of her way and made an unbelievable change in my life that is still, you know, bearing fruit in my life. I wish I had thanked her. And I actually dedicated a book to her. But she's been dead for years now. But it's amazing what one person can do for another by reaching out.
It is. It's like that ripple effect.
Yep, the ripple effect, exactly.
So, okay. You also won, let me get this right. You won the West Coast Songwriters Saratoga Chapter Song of the Year Award.
I'm sorry, that's such a long, it's a long thing, yeah. I love songwriting.
Did I get it right?
You got it right. You got it perfectly. This is another story where one little event in childhood can make such a big difference. And this is one of the reasons that in Glad to Be Dad, I talk so much about parenting and what it means. Nobody changes the world more potentially than a parent, because the world is made up of people. You know, what happens to us as human beings? So my mom decided, and again, here's my mom. She's so busy and overworked. And at some point, I mean, I don't know how she could do anything just besides doing the laundry, getting food on the table, you know, getting us to school, buying clothes, whatever. She bought an old stand-up piano, beat up piano, probably, I think she paid $75 for it. I took lessons for 6 weeks. My piano teacher was too easy on me, so I got bored and I quit, but I kept playing. And so, you know, that became a huge part of my life and still is. And, you know, when I got here, I joined West Coast Songwriters and I compete in these competitions, yeah.
So now you compose music as well as write it, correct?
I do, right. I write the music.
So how did you go from a piano and not taking lessons?
Well, you know, it's funny because I had like 5 lessons and I learned just enough to start. The great thing about the piano is a very visually organized instrument, so you can see where all the notes are. Like if you look at a saxophone or a guitar, you don't know where you are. I mean, good players do, but I didn't. And I just started playing and picking it up. And my piano teacher, we were doing da 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 da. I was 12. It was 1960, whatever. I wanted to do Beatles. I wanted to do rock. So I started playing that kind of music, and I just picked things out over the years. And I'm one of the many people in the world. I was surprised. I didn't realize how many people play who can't read or write music. Of all people, the Beatles didn't read or write music. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the level of their musical performances and musical writing is huge, but they didn't read or write. So that's how it happened. I'm an ear player.
I have a son like that, but he's never actually, you know, had it down. He makes things up as he goes. He plays by ear, and he makes things up, but he never has. I told him he should record it or something.
Well, and that's because on one hand, there's improv where every time you make it new. But what I do too is I record, and when I record them and I do what I call a talk through, which is, by the way, very, very inefficient compared to musical notation. It'd be much better if I could write, because I'll say things like, well, you play a C here and then you add a C7, but that's how I do it.
So will you share a short tune with us that you wrote?
I'll share. This is a song that's not finished. I like all the genres. This would be like a country song, or maybe more of a Cajun song. But jambalaya is a dish that they serve in Louisiana. Cajun cookie, just delicious. rice and sausage and all this stuff together. So I want to, it's funny because the lyric that I want to do for this, which I had planned, ties into this idea because it's about a mother who is doing so much for her kids, but they're getting tired of having jambalaya every day. And, you know, the idea is that through the lyric, the kids will realize how much she's doing for them. Anyway, so the chorus would go, jambalaya Monday, jambalaya Tuesday, jambalaya Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, jambalaya Saturday, jambalaya Sunday, Sweber, Job, and Hezekiah. All we get is jambalaya. So
Yay!
there we go. Thank you. I'll take that.
Okay. You have 4 children's books that have received recognition from the New York Times, the Nickelodeon, the Smithsonian. Okay, this is one I'm not familiar. What's NPR?
So NPR is National Public Radio. And that was,
okay.
Yeah, that was
I know that one.
Yeah. Too many acronyms in modern life, right?
So tell me what they were about.
So the book of mine that got the most recognition at that level is called Basho and the Fox, about the famous Japanese haiku poet. And it made the New York Times bestseller list precisely because it was on NPR. So Daniel Pinkwater is a famous children's writer of the day back then, and he had a show, and he actually read the book aloud, and it was on like Weekend Edition. And he told my editor, you know, if your book's on my show, we'll guarantee 40,000 sales. Well, the problem was the book went out, but there were a lot of returns. It didn't make all the sales. So I made the New York Times bestseller list for one weekend. I really didn't make much money at all, but still I'm on the list. So I'm in the club, and I'll claim it. So,
but it's not just the New York Times. You're on the list of all these others.
I have been very, very blessed with those sort of things. Yeah.
Okay. So we found out what inspired you to write, and you've been writing ever since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without pausing.
Glad to be a dad. A call to fatherhood is a little bit different than anything else you've written.
It is.
Tell us a little bit about what the book is.
So one of the reasons I have so many children's books is precisely because I was being a father, and children's books picture books, the kind for younger kids, it's easier to finish them because they're shorter. So I was always a writer for adults who later became a children's writer. So at one point, and again, I have a lot of plans, and I'm working on a long fiction work right now. At that point, I said, well, I really want to write a full-length book, and it's never going to happen unless I carve the time out. Because I'm working, you know, full-time as a teacher, and I have kids at home and the rest of it. My wife and I are very busy. And so I said, well, I'll write about what I'm going through right now, which is the very thing that's keeping me from writing is what I'll write about. How do you get work-life balance? How does a family give time to children? What's the role of a father? What's the role of a mother? All that. And so I started writing that book based on that. And one of the things I knew would work really well then, which really did, was that I didn't have to do much research. It was like I lived in the heart of the research. Things were happening every day that went into the book. And I really recommend that parents do this, but my wife, when our kids were born, my wife would make these wonderful baby books for them. My wife just has such a knack for that, you know, with date of birth, and I'm not date of birth, that's obvious, but, you know, when the kid said the first word, did all this stuff, all these pictures and everything. And then I did what we call the kids books, where I just would write down things they said, things they did, unusual moments, that kind of thing. And I saved things, Luann, that would have been lost forever. My family thanks me all the time because I'll go back in these and read them. My kids, as adults, will read about themselves as small children, and they'll say, it's so incredible that you saved all this stuff because we would have forgotten. When you think of family lore, some stories are told over and over, so they stay in the family lore, but a lot of things are just forgotten. So I rated those books too. And a lot of those stories that actually happened to my kids made it into Glad to Be Dad. And it's a book about, again, we see this huge shift in America because I think the statistic now is something like, you know, I grew up with a stay-at-home mom at the time when that was very, very common. That big shift in the 70s meant that something like 70 to 80% of women are now in the workforce. American family is not the same. And one of the problems was the women were doing everything, basically, and it's still true in some households. We know from statistics that women do a lot more housework, or significantly more housework than men on average, because there are a lot of men who have changed. So part of that was kind of unfair. I mean, I couldn't look my wife in the face and say, okay, so now you're working full time. I mean, she grew up with that world, but you work full time. So why don't you do all the housework and you raise the kids and I'll just go, not fair. And also I wanted to be with my kids. I wanted to raise them. I wanted to be part of their lives on a daily basis. So I'm not saying that every man needs to be a stay-at-home dad, but I was, and it was an amazing transformative experience for me. Over a year with my two sons, then from birth with my daughter, I was primary caregiver. So, what happens in a country, in a nation, in a society, depends obviously on big political events and who's in the White House and what we're voting for and the economy and all that. But boy, at the heart of it, it's what happens at the dinner table and in the rec room and in the front yard. Families are what make up the fabric of society. So in some ways, that's where the action is, to make a better world and to give love. And that's what led to the book. And the other thing was, this is funny to me too, because it sounds like such a serious book, and it is in places, but being in family, kids are so hilarious. The things they say, the things they do, I mean, when parents start talking, obviously we sometimes complain and vent, but also it's like, oh, you wouldn't believe what my kid did the other day. And then we're all laughing. And so there's a huge amount of humor in Man's Guide, Man's Guide, that's the old name of the book, in Glad to Be Dad, because that's just so much a part of family life.
I think with all the stress in the world these days, there isn't enough laughter in a home.
I totally agree.
And there's more stay-at-home dads because of technology, that they can work from home. And I think I think a lot of fathers really, their dads never stayed home, so they don't really know how to be a stay-at-home dad.
And I think that's a key point too. With all of these changes in the society, and a part of that too was not only women coming into the workforce, but the economy changed, and a lot of men were getting laid off. And we're talking, not just 2008 when the economy melted down, but previous to that. So there were all these complexities about how the family was set up. But this is another key reason I wrote this book. My dad was an old school guy. He was very much a conservative. He was a sexist. He was also a wonderful person. I loved him. I miss him all the time. And he and I talked about this a lot, particularly when I, became an adult and became a father. I didn't have modeling for the kind of father I was becoming. It's a whole new way of parenting. It's not a whole new way, because my dad taught me plenty of things that I use as a father, and I'm so grateful to him for that. But there are other things that were very, very different. I'll tell you too, I'll never forget this. It's a little bit like my Sister Boniface 6th grade story. My dad says to me at one point, so my wife and I at this point have two young sons, and I think they were like 5 and 3, 7 and 4, whatever it was. And my dad says to me, Tim, I need to talk to you. I lived about a mile from my mom and dad at that point. I said, oh, sure, Dad. Can I come over Tuesday night? Yes, yeah, sure. And I go to my wife and say, oh my God, I'm shaking in my boot. What did I do? Again, I was afraid, Louette, I was in trouble. So my dad comes in Tuesday night and he sits down and he says, I'm having trouble with some of your sisters. They're teenagers. I thought you might be able to give me some advice. And again, Louette, I was like, my dad wants advice from me on how to raise kids. And of course, I was a classroom teacher. I was working with adolescents all the time. So it made sense. But I mean, this was, to me, an amazing story about the shift, because my parents grew up in this really, really hard time in America. Children of the Depression, World War II. My dad was a veteran. Then, so they've got this world that's so full of pain and world upheaval, and they come back, and try to set up a society. And then suddenly the 60s come, and a lot of things are changing. My dad used to say he had a very uneasy relationship with psychology. He didn't trust psychology, because in the old days, you did what you were supposed to do, especially for men, right? You do what you're supposed to do. You don't show emotions, you just do it. And he'd say, well, it's psychology, all this fancy talk about psychology. But he realized that my brothers and sisters like any kids, were, affected by their relationship with him and with my mom, and had their needs as children and teenagers. So he was starting to see that shift. And if a guy as conservative as my dad could see that shift, I mean, to me, that's proof that times have really changed. I don't believe in saying, well, let's just junk the past, all of those. No, those values that my parents had were some really powerful: loyalty, hard work, love, that kind of thing. It's just we needed to add more to what a family is today. And my dad was also somebody who had a terrific sense of humor. So he would laugh about those things. And when we'd share those stories, that was fun.
It's amazing to me because every one of my daughters, right when they got married, because some of them got married a little later in life. I mean, not later, but in their late 20s.
Right.
But it amazes me how they expect their husbands to, take their part of the responsibilities. And I thought, good for you.
Well, yeah, and again, it's hard. I don't know what kind of argument you'd offer to your wife if you were going to deny that. I mean, when one of my sons was born, my wife was in the hospital, of course. She had a C-section with him. And so her mom came and stayed with me and my young son, because I was working, for a couple days while she was in the hospital. So she was also an old school mom. She's wonderful, loving. And of course, man, it was so good of her to come down and help us. But I'd get up in the morning and she'd say, all right, what do you want for dinner and what time are you going to be home? And I was like, is this the way it works? What am I, the king? I just get to, I could have been gone 24 hours a day, and she's going to take care of my son. She's going to clean the house. She's going to cook. That was a world that was passing. And again, too, because I stayed home with my kids. So I was, for a fairly long time, the only male member of the Bakersfield, California Moms and Munchkins playgroup. Right, so these are women with kids who meet at the park. I was the only guy, and it was hilarious too, because they were very accepting and welcoming to me. And I also saw in that group, I saw a certain amount of tension between working moms and stay-at-home moms, and that was always so sad to me, because it's like, if you believe in freedom, then you have a right to be a stay-at-home. You have a right to have a career, whatever works for you and your family.
Well, I'm sure they respected you for it too.
Well, and it's funny too. A couple of guys showed up once or twice. I don't get it. They couldn't take it. They seemed so out of sorts. Maybe it's because I grew up with a bunch of sisters. I love these.
I think that helps.
Well, at one point, I remember when they got so used to me. This must have been, I'd been in that group for like just a couple of months. I'd be in a conversation and a woman would be saying things like, well, you know how it is when you're nursing, your nipples are just like hamburgers, and I'm sitting right there with them, and they're just talking on like this, so.
And my husband would crawl up under the couch.
Well, yeah, again, I think, my sisters, I think, prepared me for that. But and that's also a world where, imagine, so just what you and I are doing right now in 2018, this isn't surprising at all. But in 1955, a woman running her own show, that's unusual. A book show, a book reviewer, that's really unusual. I mean, to me, there's so much more in the relationship between men and women that we're making possible now than we did before. And I just think that's all to the good. I think I think both genders need to hear from each other a lot. I think that really helps.
Yeah, it's changing, but there's still some who aren't real accepting of women in the workforce. But like you said, I do think it's important that one parent stays home if they can at all.
And again,
my heart breaks for single parents, because that's going to be tough.
You just wonder how they do it, and they do. Most of them do it and do it well. And I'm with you. I believe that one parent should always be home, but I also know that there are many families who cannot do that for various reasons. And I also know that's not any condemnation. That doesn't mean their kids are going to be screwed up or whatever. What matters is how much you love that kid, the quality time you spend that with them. You can be a great parent under almost any circumstance.
It's just going to be tougher.
Sure. And how do we deal though with some of the economic things that people are facing? So clearly there are people who are at an economic level where they both have to work, and many of them are working multiple jobs. And then your heart goes out to them because you're thinking they want to be parents who are closer to their kids, many of them. and they're in a situation where they can't be. I also don't think the kid's going to fall apart and become a drug user or a criminal because of that. But kids do need a lot of attention, a lot of love.
Yeah, it's kind of scary because so many are, you know, left at such an early age without anybody to guide them.
Yeah.
And that I think there's a real problem there. Somehow we need to step in as society and help those that, you know, are in need. But
Well,
anyhow,
I just got to throw a quick thing at you there, because I think that's really important. I think as a society, we have not caught up to the changes.
mm-mm.
I think that the economy is still built on you have a breadwinner and a stay-at-home person. And you know, you'll hear people will say, well, if you're a father and you're going to stay at home with your kids, it's going to hurt your career. Society has got to change to the point where we understand that we're not working with individual economic robots. We're working with families and members of families. So I think your point is really a good one.
The older neighborhood, that it's ironic. We lived when we were younger, married couple.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in a poor area of town and had a really strong housing area where everybody was watching out for everybody's kids.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
And then we moved to a wealthier part of town, and we were lucky if we knew our neighbors.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. It breaks all the stereotypes.
But I'm grateful for, you know, the older part where I raised my older children, because a lot of times I was ill and my kid could have been in really bad trouble, but I had a neighbor that took him into their yard or her into the yard and got him involved in their kids. And
so that's literally, it takes a village, right? I mean, there's actually a village raising the kids. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And again,
as long as they're good neighbors.
Well, and that's the problem, because we don't live in that kind of village. Most of us, I mean, some do and some don't, but we can't count on that like we used to be able to, or at least most people could.
Yeah. Drug abuse is so rampant anymore.
All kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. Yeah.
Okay. In the next 5 to 10 years, what accomplishments which goals would you like accomplished?
So I'm very focused right now on finishing, I mentioned it a moment ago, finishing the first novel in a fantasy novel series that's for young adults and adults. So that's my big project right now. I also plan to write a musical, which is a family musical, and I want to write I have, not exaggerating, I have right now probably 15, 20 books or projects that are ready to go. I could sit down and start writing tomorrow. And I keep huge files of all these things that I want to do. I mean, I have a lot more book and musical.
What type of family musical?
So I want to retell because I'm a professional storyteller, I want to retell a fairy tale as a musical. That would be like a winter, holiday musical. That's the idea. It'd be very fun. Yeah, we'll see. And again, me without being able to write notes. And then I want to write a screenplay about I worked with kids who were emotionally disturbed in a group home for a time, and that was a very profound experience, and I want to do it. So those are my three. What I'd love to do, obviously, is get to the point where I could bring in more money as an artist, so I could do more art. I just want to do more of it. Yeah, that's always been my goal. Has never changed. I want to make my art, and I want to provide for my family. I do that. I'm good.
Those are fantastic goals.
Good. I'm glad you said that.
Okay, so you stated you can whistle and hum at the same time.
Look at me start licking my lips.
Rate that for us.
Now, again, I warn you, it doesn't sound good. But I do that at school visit. What's funny is you're as bad as these kids. I go to a school visit and some kid will put her hand up and go, I whistle at home at the same time, and I'll do it.
You set yourself up, Tim.
Yeah, I did. It's fun. I love to do that to kids. Yeah, it's a very odd skill.
Okay, and for our listeners, and hope right at Father's Day, you're offering a print copy to U.S. Canada winner of your Glad to Be a Dad, correct?
I certainly am, and I promise them they'll laugh, they'll cry, they'll be transformed.
super. And it's just in time for Father's Day, and so it'll be just great. Is there a final word you'd like to say before we close?
I just want to thank you for this. I just think it's wonderful what you do. I think everything I said about family love and how important, obviously, it's to both of us and to so many people, also applies to literacy. If there's one force in the world that can, obviously love is more important than anything else to me, but literacy is this force that has such an incredible potential to transform human beings and communities. And it's something we need to work on all the time, because even people who can read necessarily can't read enough or don't read enough or aren't interested enough or whatever. And I just think what you do with your blog is you're out there, you're a warrior in the army for literacy, waging peace. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm amazed at the literacy community when I think of what the whole of it is. People think of the literacy community as writers and teachers. It's editors, it's reviewers, it's bloggers, it's readers, it's bookstore owners and or all of us who are working together to do that. We are waging peace in a huge way, and I'm very grateful to you for letting me be part of.
Well, I'm grateful to authors such as you. And I have to add one comment to what you just said.
Sure.
I went back to college when my eldest went to college. And I learned so many things. I had a son that had learning disabilities. I had so many things I could have pulled on if I'd had the knowledge. Knowledge is the key to everything.
Oh, you are so right. And I love the fact that you would go back with your eldest. When we say literacy, what are we talking about? We really are talking about, literacy it's a way that we manifest curiosity and the desire for knowledge. It's that thing in the human heart and the human mind that has such promise. And you lived it. I was a teacher educator for a long time, and this was a place where we often got what we call returning students, right? Which is older students. I'm telling you, Luann, you guys were my favorites. These are people who have been out in the world. They understand what it's worth. They know what's at stake. And when you talk that way about your son and what you could have learned, that's why we got to keep passing this torch on, because there are so many things that can be so much better if people keep learning.
Yeah. I'm a strong believer in learning is knowledge, and knowledge is power.
That's exactly right. I could not agree more.
Thank you so much. And we hope that all of you will explore the universe through books. And we'll say goodbye for now. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.